everybody. Hello. Uh, can you all hear me well? Yay. So, I'll be taking a look here at the chat to see some of your answers. I'll do my best to check all the time. So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here in this afternoon. Thank you so much, Disal, for having me. I'm here representing Troika today, and we're going to talk about why your lessons should cater for diversity. And I have to confess that I'm still not super used to online teaching, even if I'm after like months. So I'll be asking you lots of questions for you to interact with me because I really miss interaction. So please use the chat box here to talk to me. Okay? Hey, hey. So to start, I just would like to tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Akemi. I'm from Rio de Janeiro. I've lived in Rio de Janeiro and worked in Rio de Janeiro my whole life, but I've moved to São Paulo in January, so at the beginning of this year, like 2 months after social isolation started. And I'm still getting to know more things about São Paulo. And I'd like to know where you're talking from, where you're watching this webinar from. Can you type in the chat box? Brasília, the Queen of São Paulo, I'm not sure, Taylor. Porto Alegre, Rio, São Roque, Santos, okay. Monte Carmelo, Minas. Nice to know so many people from the whole country, right? Florianópolis, okay, right. So throughout this whole session, I'll be doing like that, okay? I'll be asking you questions and counting on you to type your answers in the chat box. And I promise I'll try to read everything. Lots of people from São Paulo, though, but there's like Florianópolis, Guaratinguetá. Hi, Leila. São Paulo, also Piracicaba. Okay, so that's such a diverse group in terms of where you're talking from, and that's super nice. So, the title of our session was Why Should Your Lessons Cater for Diversity? So, first things first, let's talk about diversity. And my question is, what does diversity mean to you? Of course, we could get lots of definitions of what diversity means. All of them would be correct, but maybe all of you, each of you would have a different idea. So if you could take a moment to type your answer to this question. When you think of diversity, what comes to your mind? Could be just keywords or phrases. Don't need to type complete sentences, don't worry. But I'd like to know how you feel about this word. Okay, inclusion, having everyone represented. Variety. Different in some way. Yes. Have an interesting class, like diversity brings room for an interesting class. Differences, different points of view. Okay, I think it's the third time that different or differences come out. I can see some people are still typing, so. Okay, hello, Anna. Okay, so I guess I got an idea from what you believe diversity means. And I'm going to show to you one definition, and this is definition from the British Council, but it doesn't mean that it's the only possible definition, though. So here we have that diversity is about visible and invisible differences. accepting them, and it's about harness and maximize the potential that all these visible and invisible differences bring. So, as I said, some of you mentioned the word different. So we are on the same page here. I like this definition for two reasons. I like that we take into account that diversity is about visible and invisible differences, and we have to keep that in mind. Um, and although I'm not like a big fan of the word accept, because I don't think our differences are to be accepted, we want to be valued, we want to be celebrated way more than just accepted. I like the idea that there's a continuum here. So it's about accept. First, you have to accept, to harness, to maximize all the potential that these differences bring. And I chose this picture to represent diversity. That is a picture of a salad. What can you see in this salad? Can you help me name here? I'm sorry if you're hungry, but hope it doesn't make you more hungry. Hungry, sorry, I don't know. Colors, tomatoes, okay. Lettuce. I guess we can identify different ingredients when we look at this salad, right? And I like to think of diversity in a way like that. It's not about like a melting pot, some people would say, or about a soup that you get all the ingredients together, but you can't identify them anymore. I like the idea of a salad to represent diversity because we still can see lots of differences here, but as a whole, it makes something that makes sense. Uh, and for me, it looks really tasty, but I haven't had lunch yet. So any kind of food will look tasty to me, but it does look tasty, right? So going back to the idea, yes, and all of them together in harmony. And that's the idea of diversity. Seeing there's differences here, we can see all of them, but they still work together as a whole. And going to our definition, the idea about visible and invisible differences, I'd like to explore this a bit more with you. So I'd like to know a bit more about you folks here, not just names. So the question is, when you think of your visible and invisible differences that make you you, that make you who you are, that you identify, can you think of words or maybe short phrases that would answer this question? What makes you you? And type in the chat box, please. Hobbies, preferences, background, beliefs. Kai, you said my identity. Can you expand a bit more on your identity? What do you mean by that? Personality, beliefs again. Perfectly, perfectly splendid. What makes you you? Yes. Attitude, being LGBTQ, harmony, purposes, experiences, choices. Karina said my way to conduct things, right? Benedict said I'm the only one in the whole universe, and that's true. Nice. Nice to know the words that you use to explain what makes you you. And some of them were repeated here, others were completely different. And I guess each of you would answer with completely different words. And just to illustrate, I'd like to show this words here, this definition. Back in June this year, uh, Ms. Angela Davis, Dr. Angela Davis gave an interview to Bob the Drag Queen and Peppermint, two performers that I love. And they started this interview. I'm sorry, all the links and all the references that I'm using in the presentation, I'm gonna show to you at the end, okay? I'm just not playing the videos because my internet is a bit iffy, so better not risk that, but I'll show you all the references. But then, going back to this interview, Dr. Angela Davis gave this interview in June to Bob the Drag Queen and Peppermint, and they started the interview asking her, how does she identify? That was the question. And this was her answer. So she said, I identify as a communist, abolitionist, an internationalist, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, feminist, black, queer, activist, pro-working class, revolutionary, intellectual, community builder. This is Dr. Angela Davis, amazing. Maybe some of these words would resonate with you. You would use some of these words to explain what make you you as well. Some of this resonate with me as well. Uh, and one that I would like to highlight. Yes, Fabiano, I can share the slides later on. Just send me an email and I can send them to you. Okay. So one specific phrase here that I'd like to highlight is community builder, because I guess all of us here would identify with this one because we are teachers and teachers are community builders. So this is something important for us to keep in mind. What kind of community are we building with our students and with other teachers? So if we look here at the way the words Dr. Davis used to explain what makes her who she is, and the words that she used here in the chat box, we will see a huge diversity, a big variety here of the way we see ourselves. So in this class here of our webinar, there is a big variety as well. And what kind of community can we build here to make it a safe space in our webinar and in our lessons? The idea is that we have to see our classes in a way as a multicultural class. And this for us is a mini world within which to explore human issues of global importance. The greater the mix of age, language, color, religion, gender, sexual orientation, the more positive the action teachers have to take to provide equality of opportunity to participate. I don't know if you see your classes in general as this big mix of all of that, but if that's the case, it's really important that we as teachers are able to provide this equality of opportunity to participate. And if your classes are not, um, uh, they don't show this great diversity of all that, the more the reason for us to talk about diversity in our classes. So then we go back to the question that we asked at the beginning. Why should your lessons cater for diversity? If you're here, I guess you probably have an idea of why. Can you just type any quick words in the chat box for me? I'll give you the answer in a second, but I'd like to know a little bit from you. What could we do to make this safe environment, to be the community builders that all teachers are? Foster inclusion of minorities. As a dish, it should be inspiring, interesting. So our classes should be inspiring, interesting. So students can expand their minds, not only in language, but also as humans. Yes, you're totally right, Mariana. We have diversity among students as well. Yes. Remember the idea of our class as this many world. Yes, with this mix of age, color, gender, and everything. Yes. But still, then, why? Our reason. Why should we do that? To spread equality, because each student is unique. Okay, so I'll give you three reasons why. They're like the, let me see, the basic reasons, and then we're going to expand a little bit more on that. So three simple reasons. First of all learners, our students, need to be able to communicate globally with a highly diverse range of people. Not only because they are a highly diverse range of people, but also because they're going to communicate with people that we don't know, right? We're talking about being global citizens, and I guess the idea is that we want our students or learners to be able to be these global citizens, people that can communicate with openness, with suspension of judgment. So they need to be prepared for that. Another reason that I also number as one, because I mean, the three reasons are like priorities. I can't say it was first, second, or third. So another reason would be that equal opportunity and diversity themes provide real content to develop learners' language skills in a meaningful way. Some of you mentioned here in the chat box in student engagement, so students can be more engaged. And that's true, we're always looking for meaningful context, meaningful tasks, meaningful communication. And I can't find a moment in life now that we don't talk about diversity themes, you know. So it's a way to get engagement, to foster the engagement. And a third reason that is also equally in priority is that all learners and colleagues and the people that we work with, everybody that is part of the school staff, have the right to have their differences respected and valued. And this is not an opinion. This is a fact. Everybody has the right to have their differences respected and valued. So that's why diversity should be part of our lessons. And yes, this is not as simple as it seems to be. Yes, I guess I never said it's simple, and it's not simple at all, Anna. I agree. But this are like three reasons that we should include diversity in our lessons. And I guess some, or at least most of you that are here in a webinar about diversity might have this clear in your mind, but not all teachers and not all schools believe that diversity should be part of the conversation that we have in our classes. So these are three simple reasons that are based on our ultimate goal as teachers and our students to communicate. Folks, can you hear me well? Because my internet connection is a little unstable, and I'm like receiving notifications here. Okay, great, great, thanks. Right. So these three reasons allow for people that would say that, oh, I don't talk about diversity issues or I don't talk about these kind of topics in class because my role is to teach language. Yes, and it involves all of this, right? But as I said, this is just the basis of our conversations, just the beginning. Of course, diversity has a bigger role in our lessons than that, but it has to do a little bit with our own principles and beliefs as people and as teachers. So it brings me to another question. That is a short question, but not that simple. The question is, what's why? We listed here whys or reasons that diversity should take place in our lessons, focusing on students, focusing on community in general. But this is a very personal question from me to you. What's your why? Why are you interested in that? And why are you here in this webinar about diversity? If you can share your answer with us, great. Just type in the chat box. If your answer is a bit more personal and you still don't feel so comfortable to share, that's okay. Just try to answer that in your mind. What's your why? To make sure my students feel represented, also try to have more accepting students. Yeah. So Fabiana, why am I in the world? That's a deep question, Fabiana. I hope you don't expect me to have this answer by the end of this session. I said, because I was a student in the 90s and I missed having people like me respected and included in classes. That's so true. I missed it as a student, respect. We had to personalize the classes. A question of respect in all senses. So lots of you using the word respect. Paula said, I care about it. I understand that while one group is not respected, actually nobody will be for real. And that includes myself. Yes, Paula, we're going to go back to exactly this that you said at some point in our session today. Our society today, so much problems. The transfer to teachers in the school systems and miss the basic education in the family. Yes, there are. I agree with you. There are many problems. There are transfer to school systems, but school is part of the community, is part of the world. So somehow we have to address them. I have students that are very different from me. I want to be able to communicate well with them. Fabiano, great that you don't expect this answer by the end of our session because this is the answer of a whole life. Camila said it's our duty if we want to build a better world, better communication, respect. Lots of you are using the word respect again. I like to stress that. Hey, Elizabeth, welcome. So it's nice to know your whys, and even if you didn't type, but if you could answer to yourself, what's your why? That's very important because then we could list lots of reasons to bring diversity to our classes, but the bottom line is, what do you believe is your role? Uh, Camila used the word duty. It's our duty if we want to build a better world. So what do you believe is your role as a person and as a teacher? Of course. And here there are four questions that I don't expect you to answer by now. I'm going to come back to them at some point. But four questions that are really important for us to understand our whys. Who are we? We talked a little bit about that in the beginning. You shared a little bit with me of who you are. But what do you believe in? What do you stand for? And most importantly, who do we stand up for? And here I'm using we, thinking of us as a community of teachers. So it's very important that we understand that and we have that clear in our minds, what we stand for and who we stand up for. And these questions are connected to a concept that I really like that is called social justice education. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Um, so some people say social justice education, social justice in education, but but um, trying to find a definition, I'm gonna share this one with you. So near to bold. Social justice education is a philosophy, is an approach and actions or series of actions that embody treating all people with fairness, respect, dignity, and generosity. So whenever we talk about social justice in education, we're talking about this belief. Of course, there are many different definitions, but it's the idea that this is part of education, and this is a bit of what should be our role as educators to help build this world. Uh, so far, so good. Is this concept of social justice education new to you? Are you familiar with that? At the end, in the references, you have some references about that. So for some of you that are saying there's a new concept, you're not familiar, I'm going to explain a little bit. And then in the references, you have more info about that. And I can recommend a very good book about it. Yes, Ludmila, it means bringing up themes of social justice in class. Absolutely. Um, okay. Right. Some of you, I guess most of you said you're not familiar or you've never heard of it. So explore uh, let me explore a little bit more the concept then. Remember that we listed these whys. We should bring diversity to our class. So social justice education agrees with all that. So it's about all that. Yes. But most importantly, it's about providing students with the tools that they need to analyze power dynamics in the world. So it's not only about being able to communicate globally, to be respected in your identity, in your visible and invisible differences. But is a step further because we're talking here about thinking critically. We're talking about critical pedagogy here, but providing students with these tools that they need to understand, analyze, and understand power dynamics. And what I think is really beautiful in this definition, nourish students, nourish within them the seed of respect and advocacy. So it's about believing that our role as not only as teachers, as people, is to think of a better world and try to make it true. I guess Camila mentioned that it's our duty to build a better world. So social justice education believes in that. It's not only our duty as a person to build a better world, but also to work with that with our students. We want to nourish these seeds because we want them to value the importance of having a better world, an equal world. So talking about here education for liberation. And Camille and Anna mentioned here that it makes them think of Paulo Freire, and you're totally right. Yes, I mentioned a bit before. So social justice education and critical pedagogy are really connected. I didn't have a quote from Paulo Freire in this presentation because I do that in all presentations. And I wanted to do something different. But yes, it's totally about Paulo Freire. Remember when Paulo Freire was talking about education serves two purposes, conformity or freedom. So social justice education is about understanding that education serves the purpose of freedom, of liberation. So a question, uh, Evaldo, I'm going to direct what you're talking about in a second. So the question here that we ask as teachers and as people in everything we do we help people adjust to oppression or do we challenge oppression? So in our classrooms, our students, are we helping our students adjust and understand oppression? Or are we working with our students so they can challenge the oppression? So Evaldo pointed out here, aren't we indoctrinating our students instead of teaching them the subject, be it English or anything else? Yes, we're all teachers of English. So I guess most of you or all of you are teachers of English, and we're here to teach English. Yes. But if we go back, let me just go back to this slide. If we go back to the list, the reasons, the basic reasons I listed here for having diversity in our class, this is what we do, right? So we want our students to be able to communicate with all kinds of people. So this is part of teaching the language, yes. Um, so in a diverse range of situations, of conversations, we want our students to have the words to talk about lots of topics. And I don't know about you, but sometimes we kind of lack words to talk about some topics, even in Portuguese. So in English, it might be the same. So students need to know how to talk about all kinds of topics. So be it how to order food in a restaurant, but also how to question why the prices in the restaurant are that and who can actually get to eat in that restaurant. So we're not talking about not teaching English. Never. English is our main goal here. But communication involves lots of things. And one of them is to have the words and to be able to talk about topics and things that are the topics and things that people are talking about all the time, right? I can come back to this discussion if you want to, but just so I don't get carried away answering the questions, I'm not sure if I answered your question about, but I can come back to it. But just going back here to this double questions that I was asking. So this is when we talk about the things we teach and what we do in our classroom, these are the two questions that we always have to know what we are doing. And and somebody at some point mentioned that I forgot her name, But somebody mentioned at some point about freedom and being free. And this is a big principle when we talk about social justice education. I'd like to use this quote from Australian artist Lila Watson, and that she says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." So it's about understanding that all liberation and all people are connected. So it's not about having diversity in your classes because you have lots of different students and you need to address their needs. It is that, but also because the whole world is connected, and I guess we can all see lots of ruptures and lots of issues going on in the world that we're living right now, and not addressing them, or not equipping our students with the language also to talk about them. I guess we fail our purpose if we don't do that as well. But then some of you were asking about, I guess, Ludmila, as to what is a diverse lesson. So let's talk then about putting this whole idea into action. Just before I move on to action, is there any question about the concept of what we're talking about here? About having diversity be part of our lessons? So Anna said that one of the advantages to teach English is that we can talk about any topic. We don't have limits. That's true. And what I was saying is that teaching a language, it's about teaching how to communicate in that language, right? And people have to talk about issues that are meaningful. So I'm just getting something here that is extremely meaningful in all the contexts that people live, right? Uh, I guess Taylor was answering somebody else here. Got lost in that. Evaldo, I think we're talking about different things. I understand when you say we're not supposed to take part on the debate, but well, we're not taking part on the debate. Let me then explain what I mean by that in terms of action. What can we do then to incorporate diversity into our classes? I separate um, ideas into two groups. So concerning students, so concerning our relationship teacher-students, and then teacher-teacher. Okay. Um, and the first thing that I would like to say is that for me, as a teacher, something that I don't like doing is having a class about diversity. Because this is common, like, oh, some people might think that today we're going to have a class about racism. So for me as a teacher, I don't like to approach the topics like this, like having a class about that, because it gives the idea that it's just a point, it's something that happened at that moment. So I'm talking about how can we incorporate these into our lessons daily, into all our lessons. So I would advise that you don't address diversity as the topic of a class, the theme of a class, but this is built into your practice. And I have three questions then for you when it's about having practical ideas. The first one is about understanding the context and the needs of your students. So, what are the issues of local importance, of global importance in the context that you teach and in the context that your students teach? So, when we talk about social justice, there are like lots of topics. So, when we're talking about having a list of topics for you to address, but understand what is relevant for the students that you teach. Could you try to answer this question to me, like with some words? In the context that you teach, what do you think are the issues that are locally or globally important? I I would really like to go back to what you're writing with me, like it's a big comment. I'll go back to it in a second. But then just going back to my question, can you tell me then about the context that you teach? Which will be the issues that are locally or globally important? So Mariana, racism and sexuality. Hmm. And of course, these are issues that are globally important. But when I asked this question, it's just for you to consider always, always what is relevant for the group that you teach. So it's not about like covering aspects just because these aspects are globally relevant. Like, can you think of anything more specific or more local to your students? Okay, the economical challenge involving the pandemic, yes, not only in Brazil but worldwide. And in different countries, we'll have different challenges. Definitely, Carmelita. Um, mm, Everyone in the world has faced a lot of new challenges. Okay, yes. Limits of pandemic distancing, rise of racist violence. Okay, yes. Rise of violence, it's a serious issue with my students. Okay. So whenever you're going to address the topics, whatever topic you want to bring to your class, I think this is your first question that you need to answer. What is relevant to this context, to these students right now? A second question that should be, how can these issues, such issues that you identify, be present in your materials? I'm talking about materials, but of course, I mean your lessons. Yes. So whether we work with a course book or you create your own materials, I guess most teachers use some kind of material. That's why I use the word materials here. So thinking, you identify the issues that are currently relevant to your students, and then how can that be present in your materials? So what I said. It's not about only having a class about an issue or a topic, but building these issues, these relevant issues, into everything we do in class. So the images that you have in your classes, the texts, the videos, the kind of audio that you have, the kind of audio input, does this reflect the issues that you identified? So, for example, we talked about images. What kind of images are you bringing to your class? Uh, so Anna pointed out that most of the materials we use still do not bring social issues, and we need to adapt to lots of things, definitely. So, talking about images, I think this is super important because I remember, of course, things have changed, but I remember when I started studying English, for me, I hated all the images in the course books because it was basically, a lot of people quite different from me and quite different from everybody that I saw. So, do the images that you have in your class reflect this mix? What kind of texts you have in your class? Who writes that? Who wrote all this text? We tend to use a lot of input from US, UK. So is this the only input that you're using in your classes? The videos also. And I added audio here because last month at the IITFO Brown State Conference, we're talking a lot about that, the kind of models that we offer students, especially in terms of accent. Yeah. So do we only offer models of, American accent, British accent, whatever that means? So what kind of English are we showing our students? So this is a way for us to bring all the issues that we identified were relevant to our students into our classes. So it's present every day. And the third question that we should address, I'm really trying to keep track of your conversation here. I'll stop to read it at some point. So, and the third question that we need to ask in terms of, taking this into action is how can we foster empathy? So I used this image because 2 weeks ago or last week at the Disal blog, we had a post. I wrote a post about that, about the importance of fostering empathy in class. And I think this is a great way to deal with diversity uh, without changing so much or without adding some kind of debate that maybe some students and some teachers are not ready to have in class. So fostering empathy is essential everything we do, and it's definitely one of the things that we value most. And when we look at the situation the world is, I guess we can all agree that there is a huge lack of empathy going on. So it is important to foster that. And in this post, in this blog post, I'll put the reference at the end as well if you haven't read. I was talking about this idea of education as a combination of mirrors and windows. And this is a concept devised by Emily Style. And what she says is that all students deserve a curriculum which mirrors their own experience, to them upon occasion, thus validating it in the public world of the school. But curriculum must also insist upon the fresh air of windows into the experience of others who also need and deserve the public validation of the school curriculum. So the idea, the basic idea that Emily Stiles is bringing here is that we should have in education room for mirrors, so room for students to be able to identify with the context and reinforce their identity and in a way validate their identity in the world, but also windows, so perspective, fresh perspectives to different realities from students. So they get to experience a little bit what is it like to be in someone else's shoes. Maybe people that are quite different from them that they never had the opportunity to talk to. But if we have this opportunity for windows in our classes, it's the beginning for them to understand diversity in this way, in an empathic way, in an empathetic attitude. And I listed in this blog post a couple of questions because I was talking about using to foster empathy. So that's a simple. Most teachers use movies and TV shows and this kind of videos in class. So it's just a way to begin developing empathy. And I listed a couple of questions that we should ask whenever we choose these movies or shows that we're bringing to class. Again, are we just showing them the same kind of reality they're used, or just one type of model reality for them to aspire? What kind of diversity we have in our choices? So I listed a couple of questions so we could take into consideration when choosing movies and books and texts and images. These questions should be applied to everything, to all kinds of materials that we bring, really. Uh, I, I guess I don't need to go through each question because you got the chance to read. But is that okay? So far, so good? Okay. Identity, identification, a feeling of belonging. So this feeling of belonging is great when we talk about the idea of mirror, having the opportunity to validate your identity in a way. So just summing up here before I move on to the next slide, the idea is whenever we take into action diversity into our classes, the question, what's a diverse lesson? A diverse lesson is a lesson that you make sure that the issues that are relevant to your students locally and globally are present. We want our lessons to be meaningful to students, so their themes, the things that are relevant to them should be addressed. This should be part of our materials. So all kinds of images, text, whenever you select something, or even in the course book that you have, ask these questions. How diverse is this piece here that I'm working with my students? And then the third idea is to help develop a sense of empathy. And for the sense of empathy to take place, a great way, a great beginning is using something that most of us use in class, that is through movies. Just be careful of your choices. Just make sure your choices are diverse. Another simple thing that we do in most classes that we can use um, to cater for diversity is activities of role playing. This is so common in many course books and in many classrooms we do that. But then use this as an opportunity for students to really uh, put themselves in somebody else's shoes. So, for example, a very common role play, I guess I taught this many times, like when students are learning how to order food or how to buy something. I guess food is also part of most courses, right? So students have to role play like ordering food in a restaurant or buying a snack or something like this. This is a common role play that most students do. So take this opportunity to have the students be in somebody else's shoes. So what if they were vegetarian? What if they were vegan? What if they had some kind of allergies? Would this role play be the same? Would the options in this menu still be the same for them? Would they still have the same amount of options? Um, so this is a simple opportunity, something simple that we do in class that would have the students to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Quite common is this idea of ordering food in a restaurant. So again, we usually have like menus with prices, and sometimes we get menus from the internet and restaurants that we know. So again, get them to ask. So what if they were somebody else? What if they had a different job, a different situation? Would they afford to eat in that restaurant? Who gets to afford to eat in the places? Think about the options that they have. Um, so try to build into the practice that you already have a more diverse perspective. I guess that's my whole point here. So it's not about like creating lessons or developing projects. If you can do that, that's great. But a great start is that building diversity into everything that you do, into your practice. A great thing that might make us scared to address some of these topics in class is what happens if some students do not get the reaction that we are expecting. What happens if they make a comment that it's not the comment that we were expecting them to make? So when I started teaching, I usually feel really, I usually dread some kind of moment and some kind of topics that I would address in class, just praying that, like a student wouldn't make a racist comment in my class because I didn't know how to react to that. It is difficult. It does put us in spots. Uh, I know that there's a big conversation going on here, and at some point, at the beginning of this conversation, I just read, I guess, a sailor making a comment about if a student makes a racist comment in class, it's not a matter of opinion, and we got to do something. And yes, I totally agree. It's not about taking sides; it's about understanding what is right, and uh, it might make us uncomfortable on how to react with that. So I just try to list here things that work for me. It's not like a list of procedures, but it's a list of things that might help you to deal with the situation. So first of all, whenever you bring any kind of topic to your class, be prepared for a range of reactions. Of course, if you're talking about, you know, something that is not is not really meaningful or deep, the kind of reactions that you get are more like the same. But if you bring something a bit different, you might have different reactions. So be prepared for that. Not everybody there in your class might agree with what you're saying. Something that I found really useful is that be proactive, not reactive. So avoid getting reactive, but be proactive. If you feel comfortable, address that. Acknowledge the contribution. Don't pretend that you didn't listen to a comment that was weird. So acknowledge that, well, somebody said that. So yeah, you heard that. So you have to say something. Challenge the statement, not the individual. I love that because it's not about individuals, but it's about the statements, about what the person said. So nobody is saying nobody is anything, but some sentences, some words, some offensive comments should not go on unnoticed, and we have to challenge what they're saying. But it's the statement, it's not the person, right? Encourage a plurality of perspectives. Again, some of you mentioned that at the beginning. It's not about teaching students, about teaching people how to think or what to think. Of course, there is room for plurality of perspectives. We do encourage that. But there is a line between what is a different perspective, a different opinion, and what is offensive towards people, what is disrespectful. So we have to address that if you feel comfortable, of course. Um, Use real life examples to personalize the situation. I like that because sometimes in that specific context, the student can't understand uh, why their comment is disrespectful or why that comment doesn't make sense. But if you bring an example of something that is in the news, for example, it's easier. You know, if you get different examples, it's easier for the person to understand, oh, yeah, it doesn't make sense what I said. So use real life examples. And by real life, I mean like in something that is in the news or something that you know that that student would react to. I'm not saying like use examples from the person. Be very careful with that. We never want to be disrespectful of anybody. Have realistic expectations. And by realistic expectations, I mean, if you know the group, if you know your students, have realistic expectations of how they're going to react, right? And this is a bit together with be prepared for a range of reactions. So depending on your students, you might know what they're going to say, and you might want to challenge uh, the belief, even them, but be realistic. And finally, prepare to have your own opinions challenged. You know, we learn all the time, we learn a lot, and I guess it's the greatest thing that we're doing is like every day we're learning something new. So your opinions might be challenged by your students, and well, they might have a point on that. So be prepared. And this is it's a bit scary because we tend to feel comfortable when we have the control of everything, but we actually do not. So there is no illusions in that. So the idea of this was not like to make a list of how to's, okay, but just things that work for me that I hope it helps. Um, just we have a couple of minutes just to address the last issue here that I wanted. Uh, here we're talking about dealing with diversity in terms of our lessons, so teacher, student, or teacher, students. But then how do we address between us, teachers, or in the staff? So also a list here of something. Yes. So something that if anybody that is here is a teacher or a coordinator or a manager, no, a teacher trainer, sorry, a coordinator or a manager, if possible, include critical thinking or critical pedagogy sessions on teacher training programs. This kind of conversation should be part of all kinds of training programs. And you as a teacher, talk to, if you have managers, coordinators, trainers, talk to them about that. This whole conversation is so important. Discuss critical incidents. So as I said, when I was listing the things that we can do when a comment that we weren't expecting comes up. So share with other teachers uh, how you dealt with that situation. Maybe you dealt with it appropriately, maybe you didn't, and that's fine, and that's okay. We are learning all the time. So share. You know, somebody said about sharing is caring, but yes, we're learning together. Remember, we are community builders as teachers as well. We're building our community. So share. Share ideas, sorry, it's not ideals, ideas in materials workshops. Share activities that you've developed. Something that I think is really important is be able to recognize privilege and oppression in your own work context. Start to pay attention to that, right? Who are the people that are working with you? Who are the people that get really to make decisions? And finally, the last one, set group agreements. By set group agreements, what I mean is maybe going back to the questions that I asked in the beginning. So, as a community of teachers, what we believe in, what we stand for, who we stand up for. So, set a group agreement of what is a common practice for you, right? We're coming to the end of our webinar, and I just would like to end. I'll come back in a second. It's not the end. Yes, I can send the presentation. I'll show you my email in a second. So just coming to the end here, my final message. I always like to share final messages with something we want to take from this webinar. So from this whole conversation, my whole idea here was to make a point that reminds me of a talk by Chimamanda Adichie called The Danger of a Single Story. That's my favorite talk from her. And by the end of this talk, she says that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, any person, we regain a kind of paradise. So the whole idea of my talk here on my webinar is for us to keep this in mind. We need to reject single stories. So there's never a single story about anyone, not about any place. And here is a list of the references that I used in this session. But yes, if you want the presentation or the references, please send me an email. I can do that. As I said in the beginning, I work at Troika. So if you are not familiar with the work that we do, please check our Insta page. And here at Troika, we have lots of different courses. Right now, only online courses because of, the situation we're in. But we always have lots of interesting courses. I just showed here some of the courses that we have coming up. And Disal told me that all the participants of this webinar are taking part in a raffle. Two lucky winners are going to get to take one of our next courses for free. Then you can choose. So Lyrica told me that everybody that is participating is taking part in the raffle, and the people are going to be informed by email. And I have one more minute. So here is my email at Troika. If you want the presentation, if you want to keep on this conversation, send me an email. This is my Insta. If you want to slide into DMs for questions. I'm sorry I couldn't keep track of all your questions. But if you want to ask other questions, if you want to continue this conversation, I'd love to. I know that there was a bit of disagreement in this chat box, and that's great because here we're talking about something meaningful, something that we have things to say, just like your students have things to say about this topic as well. So please, let's keep on this conversation. Thank you so much for being here in this Wednesday afternoon, and I'll see if I can read all the questions later. Well, please feel free to send any questions that you want. Thank you.